The Joyful Friar podcast is made possible by the generous support of our friends. To support the podcast, please visit nathan-castle.com and donate today. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm Father Nathan Castle, your host. Today we'll be doing part 3, the final part of a trilogy about Dr. Lawrence. I told his story 2 episodes ago, and then last time we did what we call compassionate response to his story. Today we'll do a spiritual practice or two that somehow is evoked by hearing his story. If you recall, his the scene that he presented in a dream is different than many that I received because he didn't die a sudden violent death, which is what I deal with most of the time. Instead, he showed me a scene of an elderly man, a frail man in a bed with a woman shampooing his hair. He also showed me getting up and walking to the bathroom sink. It was like a nursing home room to rinse the shampoo out of his hair, and I woke up. Well, it turned out that he was a professor, retired professor. He said, I didn't retire into leisure, I retired into ill health. So he had, late in life, he broke a hip and had to have surgery to repair or replace the hip. It was explained to him the physical therapy regimen that he would need to undergo and the different ways that that might proceed. And, you know, a lot of times those are quite cheery, that you'll be up and about in no time and out of the hospital quickly and so on. Well, he ended up, it just didn't work. All the physical therapy really didn't, his body didn't respond. He didn't bounce back. And after that surgery and the fall that preceded it, he was never healthy again. And he experienced a slow decline into greater ill health and decrepitude, dependence on others until he died. He told us when we got to talk with him, you know, we call in the saints and angels to protect ourselves. And when we got to learn from him what his story was about, he just said, well, that was a scene that I just thought revealed the ridiculousness of my circumstance, that I couldn't even wash my own hair. And he was bothered by the fact that he was pretty meticulous in his sense of order. And he had to get up and walk past a potty chair and what he called a bunch of medical clutter to wash the shampoo out of his hair. All of it was just sad and ridiculous. And then he died. He said, I got, I couldn't see anything positive at all. There was nothing in his imagination that had to do with the positive. He said he wasn't raised with any religious practice. He was interested in the kind of meaning and philosophical questions that world religions often are interested in. He didn't have any sense of a joyful afterlife to anticipate. He said he died while he was asleep. And when he came to consciousness, he was in a setting very much like the one he had left. Took him a while to even know that he had died. So he was in something like an afterlife nursing home room. And he said, I felt so caged, and I brought the cage with me. So he awoke into a circumstance that was sad. Not because he was being punished, it was just that was what was in his imagination. And so that's what manifested. Well, we dealt with him, and the fact he explained that he had been doing some afterlife physical therapy, and people had explained to him that every bit of exertion that you do on this side, you'll see the results of it right away, completely contrarily to what had been happening earlier. He put forth effort and nothing worked. He never regained strength. They said, no, here, for every bit of effort that you put forward, you're going to get better and you're going to see the results right away. So he improved. He was still in something like a medical system, but he said, I got to where I could walk all the way to the end of the hall. I could sit in the solarium. I could listen to the birds. And people came to visit me, and they showed me things to anticipate. And he said, it brought me to this day with you people, that there's a movement that I'm to make. Well, we did help him make that movement. When it was time for him to have an escort out the door, if you will, his parents showed up. He was their only child. They were what he called buttoned down, kind of prim and serious-minded folk. They were, I think, professors too, or at least very well educated. But he said they showed up with these novelty glasses that were ridiculous, these black horn rim glasses with the big nose and the mustache, just to signal to him that, yes, we're the people who raised you, that who you're familiar with, but there's also a playfulness about us that we probably didn't ever show you until now. So get ready for new and improved us, something like that. Well, that brings us to where I'd like to start today in terms of spiritual practice. I think I'm going to stay with the idea of somebody being in a sick bed, or at least being in a place, in a circumstance they wish they weren't in and can't see their way clear of. Some sense of being stuck with a circumstance that's at least somewhat unpleasant and apparently unchangeable. Uh, so somebody in that circumstance, it might be like a patient with a disease from which they're not recovering, or being the visitor of such a person. I'm 68 years old. I'll be 69 in a few months, and I've only spent one night in a hospital my whole life. That's pretty good. I haven't had to deal with chronic illness. The only illnesses I've ever had, I had real justified hope that I would be over them soon, and that's been the case. That probably won't pertain always, but that's been my story so far. So I've been much more the visitor, or the loved one of someone, by parents. The whole generation above me in my family has died, and many died of illnesses that involved a sick bed in a nursing home room or something. So I've done plenty of that visiting, and I've done a lot of it in my pastoral world as a priest. So I have some thoughts on how to be a better visitor, and then a few thoughts on how to be somebody who can have a sense of purpose and vocation, even if you're not in a place that you want to be. Sometimes we think of, like as children, we might have been asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? And there's some sort of enthusiasm and excitement and dreaminess and aspiration about, I want to become an astronaut or whatever. But then there are other times when we really aren't given that choice, where our life circumstance places us somewhere and we must make the best of it. I live a vow of obedience to a religious superior, and I can think of at least twice when I got a phone call that I wished I hadn't gotten, that said, we want you to leave where you are and go to this other place. One of those um, was the last place in our network that I'd even said it out loud. The last place I'd ever want to work is there. And then that there is where I was sent. And then another time, it was just that I was really enjoying building a ministry that was uh, involved a lot of travel and ministering outside of normal church networks. And I was beginning to get some momentum when I was suddenly told, we need you to go back into campus ministry right away, but we need you to be an interim because there's been a disruption and someone had to move abruptly, and we need you right now. So a couple of times I've had to leave where I was and the people I was with and just go to a new place and start over, just because. Well, I signed up for that, and I knew that could happen. And so there's no point in being whiny about it. I didn't sign up to be a whiny priest, religious Dominican. So anyway, I'll move into that kind of material about how one might maximize how one can help in a situation you didn't want to be in to begin with. But first of all, what about being that visitor, that person that makes things better by showing up? I'm a Catholic priest. I follow Jesus, the crucified and risen Christ. I say it that way because I told him a long time ago, I want all of you and I'll give you all of me. I don't know what it all means, but I know this is what I want to do. And because I know that you had a very difficult time of it and you were rejected and crucified, I don't expect following you to tickle. There's going to be times, I'm sure, when it's going to be very difficult, but I know that you'll support me and give me what I need in the moment. You don't need it. We're asked in the Lord's Prayer to pray for our daily bread. That is to ask for what we need today, not to stockpile what we think we will need so that we have some sense of security that that we'll always have plenty. We're just told to ask for what you need, your daily bread. And so I've been doing that for a long, long time. Um, just trusting that I will have what I need and all will be well. Well, I follow the crucified and risen one. I believe that I'm loved by the God of the universe. I'm surrounded by love. I'm sitting in love. I'm swimming in love. Love is all around me. And it's just a matter of my opening my heart, my consciousness to that truth, and then living in it in the best of times or the worst of times. Just know that I'm loved and I'm loving. Um, and I believe that I can do that every day, every day, every day, regardless of external circumstances. If I just make that my focus, serving the one I love and bringing light into the darkness, then whatever it is the day brings, well, I'll deal with it or revel in it. So, with regard to being a visitor to someone who is perhaps like Dr. Lawrence was, bedridden with little hope of ever regaining previous vitality, um, I remember that well, especially with my dad. He died of Parkinson's disease over a 10-year period, and uh, there were, you know, there was a decline of all losing all kind of skills and so on. But I'm thinking really towards the end, the last year or two, he was nonverbal. All he could do was look. His eyes were open a lot, and we could look at each other. I could hold his hand. I could talk to him and tell him stories. Um, and then toward the end, all I really did was look. We just gazed at one another, and it's still a vivid memory. It was it useful? I wasn't there to provide a service for him other than to be his son who sat next to the bed and held his hand and looked me in the eye. Sometimes I think we just need to be content with that, that we don't need to feel like we're changing the world. We're just loving somebody by being with them and letting that be enough. Um, I remember I was graced on the first anniversary of his death. No, I'm skipping ahead. It was within a month or two after his death. I had an experience in prayer of a bit of a visit with him. Both of his siblings, he only had two siblings, both girls who at 18 years old, each of them graduated from high school and entered religious life in the same order that I belonged to, the Dominicans. They had been taught by Dominican sisters in their high school. And they entered the convent. And St. Dominic is a big deal in our family. And he's real and he's alive. He died in 12, what was it, 21. But all the saints, everybody who has died is still alive. And particularly in our Catholic Christian understanding of things, we believe that they can help us and we can love them. They can love us back. So anyway, Dominic's a big part of our family story, including my own vocational story. Well, my dad couldn't talk anymore, and he was laying there in a bed, uh, sleeping a lot of the time, and otherwise just taking up space, just laying in a bed, getting thinner and sicker. But he told me after he died, he said, since I passed, I've met a lot of great people. And one of them, it's funny to be with somebody who's also a father to you, but in a different way. We call Dominic in the order Holy Father Dominic. He said, it's funny to be around somebody else who is your father, but in a different way. He said, but he's the greatest. He's the best. He said, when I was laying in that bed and I couldn't talk anymore, he would just sit there and keep me company. And apparently he and my dad could talk back and forth on some other wavelength. His mind was still capable of forming thoughts. It's just that he couldn't communicate them anymore. He couldn't get them out any longer. But somehow he and St. Dominic were able to hang out with each other. And he said he's a really great guy. So I thought I'd pass that along. If you end up visiting somebody and it feels like, they're in a vegetative state, well, they're in a non-communicative state, perhaps, but that doesn't mean that there's nothing going on in there. And I think it's important when we visit somebody who is that far advanced in an illness to use our imaginations to trust that there's still a whole person in this room, in this body, even if the body is broken down in ways that prevent them from engaging. Uh, that's important to me. And even before that experience, I had already been trained to behave that way, to trust that um, you don't talk about persons right in front of them as though they're not there. Talk about their ill health or their prognosis or any other thing. To talk to them as though they're there because they are, even if they can't talk back. That's important, I think. Um, I believe as a visitor, uh, I would I would certainly come with stories to tell that I thought would would be interesting. Some of them about past experiences. Sometimes I would bring photos, a photo album or something, and sometimes a person could look at a thing and maybe even smile if they have that ability and can reminisce about things. One thing I think is important is uh, don't feel like relationships that were strained or had, arguments or uh, differences of opinion, misunderstandings in them. Don't feel like that all needs to be wrapped up in a bow at the end of the story. And that, especially if somebody dies suddenly and you didn't get a chance to say goodbye or to make the apology or whatever, please don't think that that's never possible ever, ever again. Like you missed your one chance. I know better. And um, the fact that a person is dying or dies doesn't bring an end to a relationship. You could still talk to them in prayer and say, I wish I'd gotten to say this while you were still here, but here's what I have to tell you, or here's what I want to ask you. Uh, and then I believe that there's plenty of opportunity to meet perhaps a new and improved version of a loved one who really wasn't capable yet of making the apology or receiving the apology or whatever. A lot of the people that I deal with didn't die as Dr. Lawrence did. Most of them don't. They die suddenly and violently, often car crashes, for example. And they'll often in the afterlife, I deal with people who are guilty because on the way out, their negligence caused somebody else's death. And they wish they'd been more attentive at the wheel when they were driving. And then they asked, would it be okay for me to meet the other people that died in the accident that I was the cause of? And I've heard a lot of them being told, that's a noble thought. Hang on to that thought. We'll let you know when it's timely. Because if it's about reconciling, that's not unilateral. That needs to be both parties. And there's such wisdom in the afterlife realm that I've just seen people who have that positive thought. I want to make things right. And there still is the possibility of doing that, but it also needs to be done in a timely way, in a fitting kind of way. Um, let's see. I'm thinking of maybe I'll switch over to the patient part. Um, I remember being in a spiritual direction conversation with a priest who was mentoring me, and he had been active in the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, the Pentecostal aspect of the Catholic Church, where spiritual gifts are manifest, and people who go to charismatic functions, prayer meetings, and such are accustomed to that and they're used to it. So there can be phenomenological things that you wouldn't find just at every mass you ever went to on a Sunday in a a neighborhood parish, but where Catholic people were, uh, accustomed to unusual manifestations of the Spirit. Um, I remember saying to the Lord, I want all of you. I want, I, I'm sure that you'll, stretch me, and you're the God of the universe. Just knowing you will expand me. But I remember the spiritual director listening to me and my tale of woe, whatever my struggles were at the time, and they weren't small. I remember that was a hard time in my life. Um, I think he got tired of hearing me be frustrated that things weren't the way that I wished they were. I think I had a lot of that going on. This was in my early 30s, that uh, I had certain ideas about how I wished things would be in my life, and I think he got the idea after listening to me that I was just I was someone who could never be satisfied with the way things are, that they always had to be better, and I had to somehow improve them. And I remember him saying to me, Nathan, when you get to heaven, the first thing you want to do is want to improve it. Well, I remembered it. It's years and years ago now, but um, I think he was onto something. And I think I might still want to do that. I think we can always make a thing better. We just don't have to be frustrated in the present moment that they're not as good as we wish they were. I remember a cartoon. Do you know Roz Chast? She's a cartoonist, a humorist. Uh, I think sometimes people bought the New Yorker magazine just for the cartoons in it, and she contributed a lot of them. I think it was her. I can remember the picture. It was just called Pollyanna in Hell. And it was a picture of a little girl with, I think, pigtails, and some demons have just escorted her through a door into a fiery pit, and there's some like souls that look like they're in a salt mine or something that are trudging around in the bottom. But Pollyanna in hell, she says, "Hey, anybody want to make s'mores?" She brought to hell. She brought graham crackers and marshmallows and chocolate. So she's good. Then there's fire all over the place. So let's make s'mores. Well, I can remember that because I just thought, yeah, yeah, that's I want to make s'mores in hell. If I end up in places that are just hellish, I want to be that. I don't want to make people sick, and Pollyanna, it might be difficult to be around, but I really do believe that you and I can, if we choose to, we can use the grace of God within us to do something to make something better, um, and that can be for someone else. I've had to look at. Here's one way I think of it. Because God is all around me and God is inside me, I sometimes teach little kids to pretend that they're or imagine that they're a solar panel. I live in Arizona where we have a lot of solar energy generation. You can sometimes drive down a highway and see entire fields full of nothing but solar panels. And a lot of them are designed so that they follow the sun like a plant does. They keep tilting towards the sun, so they're maximizing the amount of the sun's energy that they're taking in. They transform it into power, somehow electric power or something. Well, I have taught children this. If God's everywhere, can you can you be like that? Can you make sure that you're always tilting towards the most powerful part of God, the most loving part of God, however you imagine it? Can you let the love of God just magnify inside of you to be turned into useful power? And once you've got this useful power in you, what are you going to use it for? Well, you could do that in a sick bed. You can do that in a sandbox as a 5-year-old. You can do that anywhere you want. You can do it standing in line at the bank. You can do it while you're waiting for the light to change in traffic. Just think, I know that I'm in the presence of God. God is all around me. Would you? Mary said this in the second chapter of Luke, I think it is. My soul magnifies the Lord. You know, magnify just means to make larger in a way that something that might have been overlooked can now be seen and noticed and enjoyed. Can you magnify the presence of good in a place like the line at the bank or the grocery store or I've had to start doing that before I go on any of those 800 numbers. You know how some companies anymore don't even let you talk to them. They want you to chat with somebody in a probably a robot. Uh, I've learned that there are certain places where, like those 800 numbers, talking to your credit card company or your bank or the phone company or whatever, where it's just so easy to get annoyed. And then if they do let you finally talk to a human being, your call is important to us. The wait time is 15 minutes. You, I can want to jump at the person that finally comes on the line and be annoyed with them for doing nothing except trying to help me and working in a system that's overtaxed. I have certain circumstances, airports, those things, traffic, where I now don't enter into them until I prayed my way in. I'll sit in the parking lot at the bank and say, let me be, let me radiate the love of God to everybody in this bank, even if there are long, slow transactions ahead of me. Uh, please let me be a graceful presence in the airport. If there's bad weather, mechanical problems, all that stuff where we thought we're going and now we're not, and everybody's upset, may I at least be this little bit of light? May I make s'mores in hell? May I, may I somehow uh, be uh, a gentleman, and may I radiate peace even if I don't say anything? Can I just be someone who contributes light, happiness, and peace to a place where people have a reason to be upset? Those are just some pretty tame ones. There are a lot of places where people are in a lot more pain than the airport or the bank, but I hope you get my point. I just believe that you and I love that scene where Mary has just conceived this child after this encounter with the angel that then she goes and visits her cousin Elizabeth, who's 6 months pregnant. All she does is walk into the room and brings grace. She doesn't have to say anything. Her cousin Elizabeth says, uh, uh, "Who am I that the mother of my Lord should come to me?" So anyway, I just believe you and I are capable of being radiant beings of light, bringing light, happiness, and peace where we go, even without making s'mores, just by showing up and being uh, a gentle, positive presence that's true to who we are. I think that that's something that you could do even if you did end up like Dr. Lawrence. If you do end up, you know, I've known people that had to sit in those chairs in the dialysis place where, the your blood's going through a machine to cleanse it when your kidneys don't work. You got nothing to do but sit there. Well, can't you at least be a graceful presence to anybody else in the room or whoever has to come and stick needles in you or do whatever it is they do? Can you just be a positive presence in a circumstance like that? Um, for me, it really comes down to service. Do you believe that you're here to serve? I believe I'm here to serve the God of the universe who created everything and made it all good. And as much as I'd prefer to serve in places that are pleasant and that somehow I enjoy, I don't demand that. If I need to be somewhere else, well, then may I serve here today. Um, I'm thinking there's a biblical story of a woman who is has had a flow of blood, some kind of hemorrhaging that's gone on for years and years. The story goes that she spent all her money on doctors and gotten no better, but Jesus was walking through a crowd and she thinks, if only I could touch the tassel of his cloak, I'd be healed. And he's in a crowd, so people are all bunched around him as he's being jostled about. And then this one woman reaches to touch the tassel of his cloak, just the tiniest bit of him. She didn't ask to talk to him or for him to turn around and notice her. She just touches the tassel of his cloak and he wheels around and says, "Who touched me?" And the people around him go, "Well, that's ridiculous. Hundreds of people have been touching you. What are you talking about?" "Somebody touched me. I felt power flow out of me." And then the woman has to come forward and say, I'm so sorry, it was me." And he says, "Your daughter, your faith has saved you." Well, can you can you embody, I would say the Christ, but your higher power, however you imagine the loving presence of God being in you, can you ask for that to be with you in a kind of supercharged way so that just a little bit of contact with you could be a blessing? the tassel of your cloak. Can just a little bit of contact with you be a bright point in somebody's day? Uh, if you do end up being in a place, like a sick bed where the nurses change every 8 hours, or people come in and out to do the things that they do in healthcare settings, can you just say, God, help me to be the uh, the bright spot? Can I be your presence in the life of somebody who's in a hurry and is just doing their tasks? Can I just be that? Remember in the story of Dr. Lawrence, when he's greeted at the end, when he's ready to make his move, his parents show up, but they show up in this form with these funny glasses where they're essentially saying, we're the people who've always loved you and who you've known, but there are parts of us that we weren't able to show to you before, but we're ready to show you now. One thing that you to have joyful hope about death and what might be next for us. There might be people that are in your life story that left in a way that maybe they were drug addicted, or uh, routinely cross and maybe even mean. Um, can you imagine seeing the whole healthy, redeemed version of a person rather than just whatever your bad memory of them might be? Can you imagine them um, in glory, whatever that means? I remember my dad communicating to me in the weeks after his death. I make it sound like this happened all the time. It doesn't happen all the time, but when those moments happen, they're very memorable. And he said, "Think well of me, son," because he and I had a rugged relationship that we had mostly worked our way through. But he just said, "Think well of me." And I thought, well, that's a nice way to put that. I will. I will think well of you. There was plenty to think well of. It's just that sometimes when you have some bit of conflict, it can crowd out a lot of other good stuff. Think well of me. Is it possible for you to think well of someone with whom things didn't end so well? Hollywood endings are not always the stuff of life. Sometimes that resolution might come a little later. I've seen it happen a lot in the work that my prayer partners and I have done. Remember that Professor or Dr. Lawrence told us the thing that he learned was that he had just quit using his imagination to imagine anything positive. And he's pretty much saying, don't do what I did. Use your imagination to think positively. And that doesn't have to be silly. It can just be whatever you want to turn your thoughts to. Uh, and I have so many people on the other side now that I have lots of reunions that I can look forward to, but that's not all. There's lots of other things that I can wait in joyful hope for. But I'm not going to let myself leave the present moment and fly off into uh, other worldly fantasy, not while there's still good work to be done. At least not too much. There's that you can do that just for a lightheartedness and some fun, but there's still people around you that are someone you might serve, someone you might show up for duty and say, "Here I am to serve. How can I help? What is it that I can do here?" Well, that's about it for this episode of the Joyful Friar podcast. This has been spiritual practice that is related to the story of Dr. Lawrence. But we have another thing that's changed for us. We use the hosting site Buzzsprout. I think of them as a place that you send the edited podcast to, and then they broadcast it to a whole bunch of other different places. But they're introducing a new feature. Buzzsprout is uh, it's the Joyful Friar podcast website. It allows you to engage with us. You can share your insights by posting comments using the fan mail button. You can follow the podcast to receive updates, and if you'd like, you can support us with a monthly donation. All that's available on Buzzsprout. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. Please like, follow, and subscribe. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. God bless.